I say, my honey buns. This your girl, if it's Queen Goddess, the sweet Georgia Peach. I hope all is well with the loved ones today. As for me, I'm doing well. Always on the grind, as always, my loves. I can't sit still. I tried to lay down a while ago, and my mind get to wondering. I just, thinking about things that I want to, I want to share and things that I want to know more about. As I say, I'm always in the pursuit of learning as well. Every day, all day. We learn until the day we leave this world. I tell you this all the time, my babies. It's all about knowledge, loves. I love knowledge and I want to give you the knowledge. I just purchased just purchased another audio book. But I do these things because I think this is information that's vitally needed to be put out there, and I think the record needs to be set straight on a lot of history that was unfortunately misinterpreted or was rewritten or just damn straight out lied about. I put it like that. Okay, as I say, I'm a truth speaker because I am the truth. Okay, my loves. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna get into this book, Before the Mayflower, and this book is by LeRon Bennett, A History of the Negro in America, 1619 to 1962.
Is audible.
Mm-mm.
You are about to hear Before the Mayflower, A History of the Negro in America, 1619 to 1962, by LeRon Bennett, narrated by John Riddle. This book grew out of a series of articles which were published originally in Ebony magazine. The book, like the series, deals with the trials and triumphs of a group of Americans whose roots in the American soil are deeper than those of the Puritans who arrived on the celebrated Mayflower a year after a Dutch man of war deposited 20 Negroes at Jamestown. This is a history of the other Americans and how they came to North America and what happened to them when they got here. The story begins in Africa with the great empires of the Sudan and Nile Valley, and ends with the second Reconstruction, which Martin Luther King Jr. and the sit-in generation are fashioning in the North and South. The story deals with the rise and growth of slavery and segregation, and the continuing efforts of Negro Americans to answer the question of the Jewish poet of captivity, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? This history is founded on the work of scholars and specialists and is designed for the average reader. It is not, strictly speaking, a book for scholars, but it is as scholarly as 14 months of research could make it. Readers who would like to follow the story in greater detail are urged to read each chapter in connection with the outline of Negro history in the appendix. Without the help and encouragement of many people, this book would not have been possible. John H. Johnson, president of Johnson Publishing Company, conceived the idea for the series and made it possible for me to spend 14 months researching and writing it. The editors of Johnson Publishing Company were also helpful with suggestions and criticisms. I am especially indebted to the managing editors of Ebony, Herbert Nipson and Arabelle Thompson, and Doris Saunders, Lucille Finney, Basil Phillips, Norman Hunter, Ariel Strong, Herbert Temple, Lacey Crawford, and Robert E. Johnson. I should like to express my appreciation to the personnel of the University of Chicago Library, the Johnson Publishing Company Library, the Hall Branch of the Chicago Public Library, and the Chicago Historical Society. My wife Gloria also has many thanks for her suggestions and understanding. Whatever virtues this book has are due to the help and encouragement of other people. The errors are my own. When this material appeared in Ebony magazine in an abridged form, a great many readers, Negroes and whites, were surprised by the depth of involvement of Negroes in the American experience. They were surprised, for example, to discover that Negroes were at Lexington and Concord, and that they stood with Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans, and with William Lloyd Garrison in the battle against slavery. The reader, I believe, will be astonished by the richness of the Negro's heritage. He will also perceive, I hope, that this story is relevant to the struggle of all men, and that it is a moving chapter in the whole human drama. LeRon Bennett, Jr., August 1962, Chicago, Illinois. Chapter 1. The African Past. What is Africa to me? Copper sun or scarlet sea? Jungle star or jungle track? Strong bronzed men or regal black? Women from whose loins I sprang when the birds of Eden sang? County Cullen. A series of revolutionary discoveries has spurred a radical reevaluation of the strong bronzed men and regal black women from whose loins sprang 1 out of every 10 Americans. This reevaluation has yielded a new perspective on African and human history. Africa, long considered the dark continent, is now regarded as the place where man first received light. Ancient Africans, long considered primitive and ignorant, are now revealed as creative contributors to Egyptian civilization and builders of powerful states in the Sudan. From Olduvai Gorge in East Africa, from caves in the Sahara and excavations in the Nile Valley have come bits of bone and husks of grain, which speak more eloquently than words of the trials and triumphs of the African ancestors of the American Negro. Consider the following items. Olduvai Gorge, a series of startling discoveries in this area, suggests that the most important and fascinating developments in human history took place in the Dark Continent. Discoveries by Dr. L.S.B. Leakey and other scholars indicate that man was born in Africa, that he began to use tools there, and that this seminal invention spread from Europe to Asia. The Nile Valley. Important finds in the Sudan and Nile Valley proved that peoples of a Negro type were influential contributors to that cradle of civilization, Egypt. Discoveries at excavations near Khartoum in the Sudan and at El Badari on the Nile indicate that Stone Age Negroes laid the foundation for much of the civilization of the Nile Valley and manufactured pottery before pottery was made in the world's earliest known city. The Congo. Archaeologists unearthed remains of a Shongo people who lived some 8,000 years ago and used a primitive abacus or multiplication table, possibly the oldest in the world. The Sahara. Henri Lot, French explorer, discovers rock paintings which suggest to author Basil Davidson that peoples of a Negro type were painting men and women with a beautiful and sensitive realism before 3000 BC, and were perhaps the originators of naturalistic human portraiture. Later discoveries. W.M. Whitelaw writes, all the way from Kenya to Transvaal, not only of early human remains, but also of advanced anthropoid types, have brought the historical anthropologist to a state of confused expectancy. Considerably more evidence will have to be brought to light, however, before even the main outlines of man's early history in Africa can be drawn. It is already reasonable, however, to believe that such evidence may be forthcoming, as will require a radical change of perspective on African history, if not on history itself. When the human drama opened, Africans were on the scene and acting. For a long time, in fact, the only people on the scene were Africans. For some 600,000 years, Africa and Africans led the world. Were these people who gave the world fire and tools and cultivated grain, were they Negroes? The ancient bones are silent. It is possible, indeed probable, that they were dark-skinned. More than that cannot be said at this time. Civilization started in the great river valleys of Africa and Asia, in the fertile crescent of the Near East, and along the narrow ribbon of the Nile in Africa. In the Nile Valley, that beginning was an African as well as an Asian achievement. Negroes, or people who would be considered Negroes today, were among the first people to use tools, paint pictures, plant seeds, and worship gods. Back there, in the beginning, blackness was not an occasion for obloquy. In fact, the reverse seems to have been true. White men were sometimes ridiculed for the unnatural whiteness of their skin. Black people were known and honored throughout the ancient world. Ancient Ethiopia, a vaguely defined territory somewhere to the south of Egypt, was hailed as a place fit for the vacation of the gods. Homer praised Memnon, king of Ethiopia, and black Eurybates. A visage solemn, sad, but sable-hued. Short, woolly curls o'erfleeced his bending head. Eurybates, in whose large soul alone Ulysses viewed an image of his own. Homer, Herodotus, Pliny, Diodorus, and other classical writers repeatedly praised the Ethiopians. The annals of all the great early nations of Asia Minor are full of them. Lady Flora Louisa Lugard writes, "The Mosaic records allude to them frequently, but while they are described as the most powerful, the most just, and the most beautiful of the human race, they are constantly spoken of as black, and there seems to be no other conclusion to be drawn than that at the remote period of history, the leading race of Western world was a black race." The Ethiopians claim to be the spiritual fathers of Egyptian civilization. Diodorus Siculus, the Greek historian who wrote in the 1st century BC, said, "The Ethiopians conceive themselves to be of greater antiquity than any other nation, and it is probable that born under the sun's path, its warmth may have ripened them earlier than other men." They suppose themselves to be the inventors of worship, of festivals, of solemn assemblies, of sacrifices, and every religious practice. However that may be, it is well established that black people from somewhere were an important element among the peoples who fathered Egyptian civilization. Bedouin culture proves that black men camped on the banks of the Nile thousands of years before the Egypt of the pharaohs. Bodies were excavated at El Badari amid artifacts suggesting a date of about 8000 BC. In the intestines of these bodies were husks of barley, which indicated that the Bedouins, a people of a Negro type, had learned how to cultivate cereals. The beautifully fashioned pottery the Bedouins made was never surpassed, not even in Egypt's days of greatest glory. The more we learn of Nubia and the Sudan, Dr. David Randall McIver said, the more evident does it appear that what was most characteristic in the pre-dynastic culture of Egypt is due to intercourse with the interior of Africa and the immediate influence of that permanent Negro element, which has been present in the population of southern Egypt from the remotest times to our own day. If Negroes were an important element among the peoples who fathered Egyptian civilization, what were the Egyptians? The question bristles with thorns. The only thing that can be said with assurance is that they probably were not Caucasians. The evidence suggests that they were a black, brown, and yellow-skinned people who sprang from a mixture of Negro, Semitic, and Caucasian stocks. How did the Egyptians see themselves? They painted themselves in 3 colors: black, reddish-brown, and yellow. The color white was available to them, but they used it to portray blue-eyed, white-skinned foreigners. One of the great murals of Egyptian art is the procession from a tomb of Thebes in the time of Thutmose III. The Egyptians and Ethiopians in the procession are painted
What's
in
up,
the
Steve?
usual
How you
brown
doing,
and
love?
black colors. 37 whites in the procession are rendered in white tones. Who were they? J.A. Hoskins said they were probably white slaves of the king of Ethiopia, sent to the Egyptian king as the most acceptable present. Great Negro scholars W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, William Leo Hansberry have insisted that the ancient Egyptians from Menés to Cleopatra were a mixed race who presented the same physical types and color ranges.
This stuff we already knew. But I'm just gonna put it on out there so the whole world can know. Those who refuse to, admit the truth.
American Negroes, a people, in short, who would have been forced to sit on the back seats of the buses in Mississippi. If the Egyptians and the majority of the tribes of northern Africa were not Negroes, Carter Woodson said, then there are no Negroes in the United States. Most scholars.
I started to buy that book as well. That book by Carter G. Woodson, and it's another one I looked at too that I was thinking about. Buying. I just brought this book. Well, all these books, these audio books that I be podcasting, I purchased all of them. Out of my pocket. It cost me to get this information and put it out there. I do it because I feel like it's my purpose to do this. I feel like this is what the Most High want me to do: educate the people. Enlighten the collective, raise the consciousness, the vibrations. It's all out of love. I just be wanting people to know. I'm not just out here just putting a whole bunch of foolishness out there. I put things out there that's gonna put something in your head, give you some knowledge. Because knowledge is power. Always remember that.
Deny that the Egyptians were Negroes, despite the testimony of an eyewitness. Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited the country some 500 years before Bethlehem. The Egyptians, he said, were black and curly-haired. Group identity aside, it is clear from the record that a large proportion of the ancient Egyptians, at least one-third, were undoubted Negroes. Many, perhaps most of the soldiers, were Negroes. Black peoples toiled on the pyramids, offered prayers to the sun god, and served with distinction in the state bureaucracy. Ancient Egypt knew him, the Negro, Alexander Chamberlain said, both bond and free, and his blood flowed in the veins of not a few of the mighty pharaohs. Ra-Nehesi and several other pharaohs have been identified as Negroes by eminent scholars. So has Queen Nefertari, the most venerated figure, Sir Flanders Petrie said of Egyptian history. Nefertari was the wife of Ahmes I, Egypt's great imperial leader, and was co-founder of the famous 18th dynasty. She has been described as a negress of great beauty, strong personality, and remarkable administrative ability. There was prolonged and intimate contact between the dark-skinned Egyptians and the dark-skinned Ethiopians. For 50 centuries or more, they fought, traded, and intermarried. During the Middle Empire, Ethiopia was a tribute-paying dependency of Egypt. Then, in the middle of the 8th century BC, the Ethiopians turned the tables and conquered Egypt. Kashta, a bold Ethiopian monarch, began the conquest, which was completed by his son, Pianki. When Pianki returned to his capital at Naphtha, he had subdued 16 princes and was master of both Egypt and Ethiopia. The legs of his enemies, he said, trembled like those of women. Pianki was thoroughly aware of the value of good public relations. The celebrated stele in which he recounted his deeds of valor is one of the gems of Egyptology. A modern scholar, Sir Alan Gardner, says it is one of the most illuminating documents that Egyptian history has to show, and displays a vivacity of mind, feeling, and expression such as the homeland could no longer produce. For more than a century, Ethiopian kings occupied the divine office of the pharaohs. Shabaka, who succeeded Pianki, attempted to restore the dwindling fortunes of Egypt. He sponsored a cultural revival, built a chapel at Karnak, and restored a temple at Thebes. Diodorus Siculus said he went beyond all his predecessors in his worship of the gods and his kindness to his subjects. Herodotus said he abolished capital punishment in Egypt. Taharka, the greatest of the Ethiopian pharaohs, ascended the throne about 690 BC at the age of 42. He was, from all accounts, a remarkable leader who improved the economic and cultural life of his realm. Sir E.A. Wallace Budge said Taharka, the Turhaka of the Bible, was a capable and energetic king, and under his able rule, the country, notwithstanding his wars with the Assyrians, enjoyed a period of prosperity for about 25 years. That he should have been able to offer such steadfast resistance to the Assyrians says much for his capacity as a soldier and leader of men. There must have been something attractive in his personality. His deeds appealed so strongly to the popular imagination, at all events in Greek times, that they were regarded as the exploits of a hero. This resourceful leader left inscriptions which indicate that he conquered the Hittites and the Assyrians, claims which most Egyptologists discount. His sway was so complete and his power was so absolute that he dubbed himself Emperor of the World. A famous Egyptologist called his reign that astonishing epoch of nigger domination. Dr. Randall McIver said, "It seems amazing that an African Negro should have been able with any sort of justification to style himself Emperor of the World." Outmaneuvered by the Assyrians, Taharka retired to Napata, where Ethiopian kings continued to rule for several centuries. The capital was moved later farther south to Meroe, where strong-willed queens called Candaces ruled. One of these queens, a one-eyed woman with masculine characteristics, led the Ethiopians in unsuccessful forays against the Romans. The connection between this civilization and modern Ethiopia is far from clear. Some scholars call ancient Ethiopia Kush, and begin the history of modern Ethiopia with the rise of the Aksumite kingdom in what is now Eritrea and what is now northern Abyssinia. Modern Ethiopia, one of the oldest countries in the world, traces its lineage back to the famous visit the legendary Queen of Sheba, black but comely, paid Solomon some 1,000 years before Christ. The Aksumite kingdom reached the height of its power in the 5th century, when Christianity became the official religion. With the rise of Islam, the Ethiopians of Aksum were isolated and slept, Edward Gibbon wrote, for nearly 1,000 years, forgetful of the world by whom they were forgotten. During the early Christian era, Negroes were scattered to the four corners of the world. For many centuries, Negro merchants traded with India, China, and Europe. Other Negroes were sold as slaves in Europe and Asia. By the beginning of the Islamic era, Negroes, as merchants and merchandise, had been introduced into many white countries. There was a Negro general in Japan, Sakanoi Tamuramaro. Negroes also lived in Venice in Europe and in the deserts of Arabia. The best known of the Arabist Negroes was Antar, the impassioned lover-warrior poet. The son of an attractive slave woman and an Arab nobleman, Antar became a famous poet and was immortalized after his death as the Achilles of the Arabian Iliad. Fearless, impetuous, ready to fight, sing a lyric, or drink wine, Antar won fame in the poetic contests, which were common in pre-Islamic days. His fame spread, and he was hailed as the greatest poet of his time. Like most Arabian poets, Antar had an eye for ladies and love. 'Twas then her beauties first enslaved my heart. those glittering pearls and ruby lips, whose kiss was sweeter far than honey to the taste. Antar died about AD 615, and his deeds were recorded in literary form as The Romance of Antar. This book, Edward E. Holden wrote, has been the delight of all Arabians for many centuries. Every wild Bedouin of the desert knew much of the tale by heart, and listened to its periods and to its poems with quivering interest. His more cultivated brothers of the cities possessed one or many of its volumes. Every coffee house in Aleppo, Baghdad, or Constantinople had a narrator who, night after night, recited it to rapt audiences. The unanimous opinion of the East has always placed the Romance of Antar at the summit of such literature. As one of their authors well says, "The 1001 Nights is for the amusement of women and children. Antar is a book for men." When the Arabs exploded and carried Islam across North Africa and into Spain, Negroes went with them. As a religious ethic, Islam was unusually effective in cutting across racial lines. All Muslims, whatever their colors, were brothers in the faith. "If a Negro slave is appointed to rule you," Muhammad said, "hear and obey him, though his head be like a dried grape." In this climate, a man could be a slave today and a prime minister tomorrow. An extraordinarily large number of Negroes played historic roles in the rise and spread of Islam. Men like Muhammad Ahmad, the Sudanese Negro who claimed to be the Messiah; Abdul Hassan Ali, the Black Sultan of Morocco; and Bilal, and the friend of Muhammad. There were also numerous black generals, administrators, and poets. The abundant and detailed descriptions of interracial relations in the Arabian Nights and other Oriental literature prove that race was not a crucial factor in the Islamic world. Negroes went with crusading Islam into southern Europe, where a learned and celebrated poet, a black of the Sudan, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim al-Kinimi, was a favorite at the court of al-Mansur in Seville, Spain. In the Islamic era, three powerful states, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, emerged in the western Sudan, a broad belt of open country, sandwiched between the Sahara in the north and the rainforest of the Guinea coast on the south. At one time, the peoples and rulers of these countries were classified out of the Negro race. It is now known that they were Negroes. Some of them were converted to Islam in the 11th century. The extent of Muslim influence is debatable, but it seems probable that the upper classes and leaders, especially in the large cities, were black Muslims. As political entities, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai do not suffer in comparison with their European contemporaries. In several areas, the Sudanese empires were clearly superior. It would be interesting to know, Basil Davidson wrote, what the Normans might have thought of Ghana. Anglo-Saxon England could easily have seemed a poor and lowly place beside it. The economic life of these states revolved around agriculture, manufacturing, and international trade. Rulers wielded power through provincial governors and viceroys, and maintained large standing armies. Chain-mailed cavalrymen who carried shields and fought with swords and lances formed the shock troops of the armies. Ibn Battuta, an Arab traveler who visited Mali in the 14th century, was impressed by the orderly flow of life. "Of all people," he said, "the blacks are those who most detest injustice. Their sultan never forgives anyone who has been guilty of it." Proud, a little haughty perhaps, the Sudanese were a formidable people. When the monarch of one state was overthrown, the women committed suicide because they were too proud to allow themselves to fall into the hands of white men. Battuta was flabbergasted by the servile behavior of the whites in Mali. The black viceroy who received the merchants of the caravan with which Battuta was traveling remained seated while the whites stood before him. He spoke to the whites through an interpreter, although he understood their language. He did this, Batuta said, solely to indicate his disdain for them. Trade and commerce flourished in the great cities that sprang up in the Sudanese savannah, and the intellectual life was brisk and stimulating. Janneh and Timbuktu were known throughout the Muslim world as centers of culture and learning. The citizens were sophisticated and knowledgeable. Batuta said the black women were of surpassing beauty. They were neither downtrodden nor meek, these women. Batuta said they were shown more respect than the men. He added, their men show no signs of jealousy whatever. The women show no bashfulness before men and do not veil themselves. The power and wealth of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai stemmed from the trans-Saharan trade, which exerted a profound influence on Sudanese civilization. The basis of this trade was gold. From the north came caravans of 12,000 or more camels laden with wheat, sugar, fruit, textiles, and salt, which were exchanged in the Sudan for gold and other products. In the power politics of that day, the country which controlled this trade controlled the Sudan. Ghana, which was old when the Arabs first mentioned it in 8800, dominated the Sudan for almost 300 years. It flourished in the 9th and 10th centuries and reached the peak of its power in the early part of the 11th century. The rulers of Ghana, which was one of the main suppliers of gold for North Africa and Europe, were fabulously wealthy. El-Bikri, an Arab geographer who wrote in 1067, said the king owned a nugget of gold so large that he could tether his horse to it. Tinkaminan, who ruled Ghana in the middle of the 11th century, had an army of 200,000 men and lived in a castle decorated with sculpture and painted windows. When he gives audience to his people, El-Bikri said, to listen to their complaints, he sits in a pavilion around which stand his horses, caparisoned in cloth of gold. Behind him stand 10 pages holding shields and gold-mounted swords, and on his right hand are the sons of the princes of his empire, splendidly clad and with gold plaited into their hair. The governor of the city is seated on the ground in front of the king, and all around him are his viziers in the same position. The gate of the chamber is guarded by dogs of an excellent breed, who never leave the king's seat. They wear collars of gold and silver. In the 11th century, Ghana fell to a band of Muslim fanatics, and the torch of Sudanese civilization passed to Mali, which began as a small Mandingo state on the left bank of the upper Niger River. Mali's history goes back to the 7th century, but it owes its fame to 2 men, Sundiata Keita and Gonga Musa. Keita transformed the small state into a great empire. Musa, the best-known ruler of the ancient Sudan, came to power in 1307 and put together one of the greatest countries of the medieval world. Musa is best known for a pilgrimage he made to Mecca in 1324. He went in regal splendor with an entourage of 60,000 persons, including 12,000 servants. 500 slaves, each of whom carried a staff of pure gold weighing some 6 pounds, marched on before Musa. 80 camels bore 24,000 pounds of gold, which the black monarch distributed as alms and gifts. Musa returned to his kingdom with an architect who designed imposing buildings in Timbuktu and other cities of the Sudan. Mali declined in importance in the 15th century, and its place was taken by Songhai, whose greatest king was Askia Muhammad. Askia, a general who had served as prime minister, seized power in 1493, a year after the discovery of America. He reigned for 19 years and built the largest and most powerful of the Sudan states. His realm was larger than all Europe and included most of West Africa. He was obeyed, a Sudanese writer said, with as much docility on the farther limits of the empire as he was in his own palace, and there reigned everywhere great plenty and absolute peace. A brilliant administrator and an enlightened legislator, Askia reorganized the army, improved the banking and credit systems, and made Gao, Walata, Timbuktu, and Janae intellectual centers. He has been hailed as one of the greatest monarchs of this period. Alexander Chamberlain said, in personal character, in administrative ability, in devotion to the welfare of his subjects, in open-mindedness towards foreign influences, and in wisdom in the adoption of non-Negro ideas and institutions, King Askia was certainly the equal of the average European monarch of the time, and superior to many of them. Timbuktu, during Askia's reign, was a city of some 100,000 persons, filled to the top with gold and dazzling women. One of the most fabled and exotic cities in the medieval world, the Sudanese metropolis was celebrated for its luxury and gaiety. The towering minarets of two great mosques dominated the face of the city. From the great mosque, flat-roofed houses of wood covered with plaster radiated in all directions. The older Sankor Mosque, to which was attached the University of Sankor, was the center of intellectual life. Both buildings were of cut stone and lime. Other buildings fronted the narrow streets. Factories and shops where one could buy exotic goods from North Africa and faraway Europe. Leo Africanus, a Christianized Moor who visited the city in the 16th century, wrote, "It is a wonder to see what plenty of merchandise is daily brought hither, and how costly and sumptuous all things be. Here are many shops of artificers with merchants, and especially of such as weave linen." In the narrow streets of Timbuktu, scholars mingled with rich black merchants, and young boys sat in the shade, reciting the Koran. Visiting Arab businessmen wandered the streets, looking no doubt for the excitement for which the city was famed. Perhaps even at that early date, businessmen were traveling on expense accounts. Youth from all over the Muslim world came to Timbuktu to study law and surgery at the University of Sankor. Scholars came from North Africa and Europe to confer with the learned historians and writers of the Black Empire. S. Sadi, a Timbuktu intellectual who wrote a history of the Sudan, said his brother came from Janae for a cataract operation at the hands of a distinguished surgeon. The operation, he said, was successful. As Sadi, incidentally, had a private library of 1,600 volumes. Timbuktu, during the reign of Askia the Great, was an intellectual's paradise. A Sudanese literature developed, and El Asadi, Hamid Baba, and other intellectuals wrote books. Leo Africanus said, "In Timbuktu there are numerous judges, doctors, and clerics, all receiving good salaries from the king. He pays great respect to men of learning. There is a big demand for books in manuscript imported from Barbary. More profit is made from the book trade than from any other line of business. Since man first learned to write, few cities have been able to make such a claim." The University of Sankor and other intellectual centers in Timbuktu had large and valuable collections of manuscripts in several languages. Scholars traveled to the Songhay city to check their Greek and Latin manuscripts. The seed scattered here took deep roots. Hundreds of years later, Heinrich Barth met an old blind man in the Sudan. "This," he reported, "was the first conversation I had with this man. I could scarcely have expected to find in this out-of-the-way place a man not only versed in all the branches of Arabic literature, but who had even read, nay, possessed a manuscript of those portions of Aristotle and Plato which had been translated into Arabic." How did the people of Timbuktu amuse themselves? If Songhay writers can be believed, Timbuktu was Paris, Chicago, and New York blended into an African setting. Shocked Songhay historians said most of the people amused themselves with music, love, and the pleasures of the cup. Music was the rage. Orchestras with both male and female singers were preferred, and midnight revels were common. The dress of the women was extravagantly luxurious. Men and women were fond of jewels, and the women dressed their hair with bands of gold. Dramatic displays, including dancing, fencing, gymnastics, and poetic recitations, were popular. So was chess. The story is told of a Songhai general who bungled a military campaign and explained that he became so engrossed in a chess game that he paid no attention to the reports of his scouts. Askia, a liberal man who had several wives and 100 sons, the last of whom was born when he was 90, was disturbed by the free and easy life of Timbuktu. He attempted, apparently without too much success, to curb the free intercourse between men and women. Timbuktu and the civilization of which it was a flower declined in the 17th century, and the reign of the great West African states came to an end. Why did Sudanese civilization collapse? W.E.B. Du Bois says it fell before the trip-hammer blows of two of the world's great religions, Islam and Christianity. Other students cite the difficulties of defense in the open Sudanese savannah and the corrupting influence of the slave trade. S. Sadi, who wrote the Tariqa Sudan in the dying days of the Songhai Empire, has advanced another reason: social dissolution. The people, he said, had grown fat and soft on luxury and good living. At this moment, he said, faith was exchanged for infidelity. There was nothing forbidden by God which was not openly done. Men drank wine. They gave themselves up to vice. As to adultery, it became so frequent that indulgence in it was almost accepted as permissible. Without it, there was no elegance and no glory. Because of these abominations, the Almighty in his vengeance drew upon the Songhai the victorious army of the Moors. The age of the great Sudan empires ended, but several states to the east and south, notably Mosai, Hausa, Kingdom Borno, and Ashanti, retained their political identities down to the 18th and 19th centuries. Great Zimbabwe and other stone cities in southern Rhodesia suggest that strong states flourished inland. Vigorous centers of culture also existed on the East Coast, where Negro and Arab merchants traded with India and China. European penetration and the slave trade debased much that was vital in African culture. The popular myth depicts the conquering white man carrying the blessings of civilization to naked savages who sat under trees, filed their teeth, and waited for fruit to drop into their hands. The truth is less flattering to the European ego. On the west coast of Africa, from whence came most of the ancestors of American Negroes, there were complex socio-economic institutions. Political institutions ranged from extended family groupings to village states and territorial empires. Most of these units had all the appurtenances of the modern state: armies, courts, and internal revenue departments. Indeed, more than one scholar has paid tribute to the legal genius of the African. Anthropologist Melville J. Herskovits has said, of the areas inhabited by non-literate peoples, Africa exhibits the greatest incidence of complex governmental structures. Not even the kingdoms of Peru and Mexico could mobilize resources and concentrate power more effectively than could some of these African monarchies, which are more to be compared with Europe of the Middle Ages than referred to the common conception of the primitive state. Agriculture was the basis of economic life, although herding and artistry were important. Specialization was advanced, with one tribe, for example, concentrating on metallurgy and bartering with another tribe which specialized in weaving or farming. A money system based on the cowrie shell was in use before European penetration. The concept of private property had not taken deep hold. The land belonged to the community and could not be alienated. Iron was known and used from the Atlantic Ocean to Ethiopia. With simple bellows and charcoal fires, the Africans smelted iron and manufactured beautiful implements. It seems likely, Franz Boas said, that a time when the European was still satisfied with rude stone tools, the African had invented or adopted the art of smelting iron. It seems not unlikely that the people who made the marvelous discovery of reducing iron ores by smelting were the African Negroes. Neither ancient Europe nor ancient Western Asia nor ancient China knew iron, and everything points to its introduction from Africa. The core of West African society was the family, which was organized among many tribes on a matrilineal basis. That is, descent was traced through the mother. Polygamy was common, though, in practice. The poor, like poor people everywhere, contented themselves with monogamy. Some tribes, incidentally, were acquainted with the allegedly modern practice of birth control. Bantu tribes said it was not good for a woman to give birth to more than one child in a 3-year period. Social life was well organized. The old, the sick, the infirm were cared for. Spinsters were rare. Prostitution was unknown. The villages and the surrounding gardens and fields were as safe as the streets of some American cities. Some tribes, as fantastic as it may seem, vaccinated for smallpox. Other Africans insisted that there was a cause and effect relationship between the mosquito and malaria. A European traveler in Abyssinia noted, "The natives hereabouts say that malaria is caused by the bite of the mosquito, but of course we know better. It is caused by the miasmas of the swamps." The West Africans were a bewildering mixture of various stocks. Centuries of contact and interbreeding had already produced different types. Some of the West Africans were short and broad-nosed. Some were tall with straight hair and aquiline noses. They were of all colors: chocolate, asphalt, café au lait, persimmon, cream. Although they spoke many tongues, there was a common substratum. Only 4 African languages were reduced to writing before the coming of the white man: Egyptian, Ethiopian, a variety of Berber, and an invention of the Vai people of Liberia. Though not reduced to writing, African languages were far from simple. Mario Pei has given a classic description of one African language, Swahili. Swahili, he wrote, is a complete refutation of the rather general belief that languages of primitive peoples are necessarily primitive and consist largely of grunts, groans, and mixed-up ideas. Swahili has a euphony that is comparable to Italian, with clear, distinct sounds, vowel endings, and a most pleasing arrangement of syllables that consist for the most part of consonant plus vowel. It is capable of such absolute precision that the Swahili version of the Pentateuch contains fewer words than the Hebrew original, without the slightest loss or distortion of meaning. Its grammatical and syntactical structure is logical, almost to the point of being philosophical. Using Swahili roots, prefixes, and suffixes, it would be as easy to construct the vocabulary of nuclear fission, or of any other science or philosophy, as it is in languages like the modernized Irish of Ire or the modernized Hebrew of Israel. Of whatever tongue, of whatever color, Africans were a deeply religious people. For a long time, African religion was written off as a form of animism. We know now that it was a great deal more complicated than that. Like advanced peoples everywhere, the Africans wrestled with the big questions. What is man? What happens to him after death? Is life a gigantic hoax, or has it purpose and meaning? The answers Africans gave to these questions determined the form of their religion. There was, to begin with, a supreme God who created the earth. There was also a pantheon of lesser gods identified sometimes with terrestrial objects. Intertwined with these concepts were the cults of fate and ancestor worship. Undergirding all was the basic concept of life forces. The life force of the Creator was thought to be present in all things, animate and inanimate. This force, a kind of individualized fragment of the Supreme Being itself, continued to exist even after the death of the individual. It continued, the applicant said, in a pure and perfect state, which could influence the lives of living things. This sophisticated concept bears a striking resemblance to Andre Bergson's Elan Vital. Bernard Fagg has found some parallels between African philosophy and modern subatomic physics. African thought, he said, is conditioned by their ontology, that is, their theory of the nature of being. For them, being is a process and not a mere state, and the nature of things is thought of in terms of force or energy rather than matter. The forces of the spirit keep.
You've been going all day, baby girl. What's going on, love? Listen, I'm finna I just did a short. I'm finna go ahead and go live. I told you I was gonna go live again tonight and finish up that psychic development and astral projection. I was gonna go live around 7, but I'm gonna go ahead and go live. I'm finna go ahead and finish this because I've done 2 chapters of this, and I'll be back tomorrow. And y'all know how I do. Y'all know me. Y'all never know what the Empress gonna do. I say y'all something, but I'm gonna come on 2 or 3 times a day. I'm the hardest working girl out here, I believe. That's that Capricorn in me. We ghosts. We don't stop until we get to the top. We don't, that's what we do. We can see a lot of people got us misconstrued. They just call us the goat, but in actuality, we are the mystical sea goats, which means that we're part goat and part fish. The top part is goat and the bottom part is a fish. So, which means that we climb to the highest of the mountain, the highest mountain, and swim to the deepest of the deep blue sea, my love. That's what we Capricorns do. We are the hard workers of the zodiac. We don't know how to stop because we're all about getting that paper. So anyway, my guy, Information Man, Information Man podcast coming on at 8:00. He's doing a show on Aries Spears. So I got to be there to see him, because he always dropping diamonds over there. Y'all, if y'all not subscribed to him, y'all make sure y'all go over there and holler at my guy. Subscribe to him, give him a thumbs up. Drop him a comment or something, in the box. So therefore, I think we had about, another 2.5 hours left on that last night. So I'm going to go ahead and end this and drop down and come back in so we can finish that astral projection and stuff up. Okay, love? I'll be right back. This your girl, Empress Queen Goddess. Go within, my love, so you never go without.